Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with End Time Ministries, and I thank you for joining me for Wednesday's edition of End of the Age. Now, I have a couple announcements before I get into my program today. Most of you know that I'm holding a Bible study in New York, downtown Manhattan, every Thursday night at 7:30. It's at 4W43, the 4W43 building, 4 West 43rd in downtown Manhattan. If you'd like to join me, 7:30. I've had many of you show up. Some people have come in from out of state to come to that Bible study. I'll be there tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. And then this Saturday, I want to announce a conference, prophecy conference that Irvin Baxter is going to be holding this January 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. And that's at the New Life Church in St. Louis. And it's on Mark Twain. It's 11570 Mark Twain Lane in Bridgeton, Missouri, 63044. And then he's going to be teaching Saturday night at on America's future foretold in the Bible. Will America join the world government? Will America be under the mark of the beast? Will we? What are we going to do? Are we going to forsake Israel? Are we going to stand with Israel? That's Saturday night. And again, that's in Bridgeton, Missouri. And then on Sunday morning, January 14th at 10:30 a.m., he's going to be teaching Breaking Prophetic Fulfillments. This year, we've got a whole new lesson prepared for Breaking Prophetic Fulfillments. Again, that's 10:30 a.m. And then, of course, after that, we always have a question and answer session that follows the prophecy update. And that's on Sunday morning. So if you want to know more information about it, you can go to our website, endtime.com, look up conferences, check it out, and join Irvin there in Bridgeton, Missouri this weekend. Love to have you there. Now, on today's program, we're going to be talking about world government. And what I've found in working here at the ministry over the years is that people, you can listen to the radio, you can watch us on TV, read the magazine, but yet some people, it seems like, have been lulled to sleep. Even though they've heard this many times, a lot of the prophecies, they can kind of get lulled to sleep in that they haven't really studied it for themselves. And you can listen to something and still not really get it and it really sink in. So that it really affects your life and what you do. So I'm going to be talking about world government today because I've seen, I've talked to so many people and they're interested in who's going to win the Super Bowl, who won the World Series, where am I going fishing this weekend, and none of that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. But if there are things that are really important in life that you really need to understand and to have a good worldview. A lot of these things that we talk about on the radio here at End Time Ministries, you were never taught in high school. You were never taught this in college. So just like Irvin Baxter did early on, he had to be re-educated after he got out of school to what's really going on in the world, and like with the world government and who runs the world, who runs America, things like that. There are things going on behind the scenes that you were never taught in school because they don't want it taught. And the world government is one of those. And so you need to really study this because, we teach obviously here at End Time Ministries that it's not going to be fully implemented here in the United States. But it's one of the biggest ways that we can prove that we're in the end time. So if you're teaching a Bible study, you want to talk to your friends, family, your any sphere of influence, your coworkers, how do you know we're in the end time? You can tell them about the world government that's being established right now and how it's prophesied in Scripture. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to give you some history, and then I'll tell you about some current events that are going on, really describing the ongoing fulfillment of this prophecy, because it's okay to do things like that. You know, follow sports, and I love to fish and hunt, and there's nothing wrong with that stuff. But if I just go through life and do pleasurable things and not really get into what's really going on in the world so I can help change people's lives, then I've really missed out on life. And I hope you understand what I'm saying, because I like to do things like that as well. But I also want to prepare people for the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's the main mission in my life. And so I've got to get into the Bible, study it, understand it, so I can go teach others. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I just want to make sure that you understand the prophecies of the Bible and things so you can go influence other people and not miss out on what life's really all about. So we're going to talk about world government today. And of course, here at End Time Ministries, we specialize in using current events to reveal how Bible prophecies written 2,000, 2,500 years ago, they're coming to pass right now. And of course, these revelations let us know that we're truly living in the end time just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Very, very important. And the prophecy of the world government and the leader of that entity, the Antichrist, is located in Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through 8. Now, it's mentioned several other times, but a very specific prophecy is given about this entity. And it says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea." This is John writing in Revelation 13. "I stood upon the sands of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon the horns were 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. So it had the body of the leopard, had the feet of the bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority." Who's the dragon? Revelation 12:9 tells us that that's Satan. So Satan is behind the effort of a world government in the earth today. And John went on to say, "And I saw one of the heads as it were wounded to death. His deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." So it's going to be a world governing system. And these beasts represent nations that will be involved in that. And they worship the dragon, which give power unto the beast. So there will be people that actually worship this entity, the dragon that gives power to this entity. They'll worship it, saying, "Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. That's the time of the Great Tribulation, that final 3.5 years. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given to him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations." That's what lets us know it's a world governing entity. "And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him," the Antichrist and his one world governing system. Everybody's going to follow that, except, it says, "whose names are not written in the Lamb's Book of Life, slain from the foundation of the world." So the number one thing you want to do is make sure your name's written in the Lamb's Book of Life. That's number one. So the question is this world government already established? Because the Bible says it's going to be on the earth just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Remember, this entity is going to rule and reign with the Antichrist over it for 42 months. So when this thing's established and up and running and the Antichrist takes over, you only got 3.5 years left. So is this world government already established, letting us know we're in the end time? Well, you will recognize it as, you've heard terms in the news, the world order, the international community, the liberal international order. These are all synonyms for the world government, prophesied to rule the earth in the very near future. And it's already in power. I'm going to describe that to you here in a minute. It's already in power right now. Many of you will recognize it by organizations that are used to facilitate its mandates. And I'm referring to, number one, the most visible one is the United Nations. It's located about 8 blocks from where I'm teaching a Bible study in New York. And so it's very visible to the people in New York, obviously. And then, of course, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the International Criminal Court, the World Health Organization, and there's many, many others. So these entities provide the agenda, and the nations of the world are expected to adhere to that. And that they're trying to create a world government. So to many who really don't understand the prophecies of the Bible, global governance is not a bad thing. And if it really, honestly, if it were based on the principles set forth in the Word of God, it wouldn't be a bad thing. I mean, the Lord's coming back to set up His world government, His kingdom here on earth in the near future, obviously based upon His Word. The current world government, which remember is it's the master plan of Satan. It's obviously a godless entity and something that obviously should not be adhered to. So, according to prophecy, though, the end-time world government, it's eventually going to be ruled by a very evil man, the Antichrist, much worse than Adolf Hitler. And that's why you must understand the effort to establish a global government in light of Bible prophecy. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about today is because so many things are happening right now, and it's just blowing right by some people. They don't even have a clue what's going on the world stage and how fast this stuff's coming down. And so we've got to talk about it periodically on the radio program, because we're going to be way off into this thing, and some people are going to go, well, how in the world did we get here? It's happening now. We're watching it. And so that's why I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to give you a description here in the latter part of the program. So, just like every historical effort to establish a world empire, there have been many. Satan has been the instigator behind all of them. And the prophesied end-time world government is going to be no different than that. So throughout time, many leaders of global empires have eventually thought of themselves as gods. And this is exactly what the final leader of the world government is going to do. The Antichrist is actually going to claim to be God. That's mentioned in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. He's going to think of himself as a god, like the pharaohs did and many of the other world leaders. So the Bible tells us that this entity, this world governing body, is going to be destroyed by Jesus Christ when He returns to the earth. And that's why the United States must not be part of the world government in the end time. I'm writing an article right now for End Time Magazine about Donald Trump's efforts to pull us out of the world governing body. It's a very good thing. I'm happy about it. Of course, the Bible says that we won't be part of this world governing body, and I'm thankful for that, because we don't want to be part of this. God's going to destroy it when He comes back. However, without a prophetic view of this world government, because even though Donald Trump's trying to pull us out, there are very influential figures in American society that could make the mistake of yielding up our sovereignty and implementing the agendas of this one world governing body. There are people that are trying to do that. There are people that are trying to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and things right under, even though Donald Trump's the president, there are still people trying to do that because Obama set all this stuff in action before he left office. And so we don't want that here in America. So we've got to resist that stuff. And we'll be talking about it over the next several years ways that we can resist that and pull out of that, because we know that it's not going to happen in the end time. We're in the end time, so we're watching it happen right now with Donald Trump and the accession of the United States from the world government. So many of you are aware from a secular viewpoint that this is already happening in many ways. Look at President Obama. He obligated the United States citizens to work toward the full implementation of the Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's a huge effort by the world government to globally govern every single person on the earth. Sustainable Development, Agenda 2030. These are, it's made up of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that make up the United Nations 2030 Agenda. And it's simply a way to redistribute the wealth of the world, many of them, and control the consumption, the production of every single person on the planet. They want to govern every aspect of your life and my life. And in doing so, the United States, under Obama, was fulfilling the will of the United Nations, their global governing agenda. And this is absolutely world government. And of course, Donald Trump came on the scene and he started talking about, globalization is a very bad thing. And when you talk about him pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement and many different things that he's done, standing in the belly of the beast, the United Nations, in his first United Nations speech and hammering down on socialism, even though that's a socialistic entity. I had to chuckle when I heard the speech, because he's putting it right in their face, and he's not afraid to do that. And it's really a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So let's talk about the United Nations, because that's really where the world government is seated right now. You say, well, is the world government in New York? Well, part of it is. A lot of what they do happens, a lot of what the United Nations, the administration part of it, happens over in Europe and different places. But the headquarters, let's face it, is in New York. And so throughout time, there have been many efforts to establish a world government in the earth. The Tower of Babel was really the first attempt at a humanistic world government. And in modern times, we refer to these efforts as world empires. Some of the more recognizable ones would be the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Medes and the Persians, the Grecians, the Romans, along with others who have had aspirations, but they weren't as successful as their predecessors in these endeavors. But however, I know your time is valuable. Everybody's is. So I'm going to focus on the current effort to institute a system of global governance. And although there are really many tentacles to this beast, the institution at the forefront of this massive endeavor is the United Nations. So the origin of the current effort to establish a world government dates back really to the early 20th century, or maybe just before that. Up to that time, World War I, also called the Great War, it was the worst war the world had ever seen. And it witnessed, we saw just over 8 million casualties from 1914 to 1918. And so the world said, they screamed, never again. We can't ever have anything like this happen. And it was from that catastrophe that the idea to establish a structure of global security was birthed. Now, there are people that had it on their mind what they wanted to do before that, but it was really birthed out of that. And so this framework of ideas became the League of Nations. And the League of Nations was formed in an attempt to ensure that another world war would never happen again. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson at that time championed the idea, but the U.S. Congress hesitated at the idea of being part of a world government. They understood what they had to do. Hey, if we do this, we got to yield up our sovereignty to this world governing body. don't want to do that. So they didn't want to surrender our sovereignty, so they voted against it. And because Wilson couldn't carry his own government into the League of Nations, obviously it quickly dismantled and fell apart. And then now, 20 years later, then you have World War II. And when it ended, we had 52 million casualties. I mean, it's incomprehensible, really. 52 million people did. World War II. And so if you thought the cry for world security was enormous after World War I, the cry for world security went crazy after World War II. It was louder than ever. And so Franklin D. Roosevelt, he was a believer in a global governing order to protect the earth, and was responsible for the term New World Order, or the Latin term Novus Ordo Seclorum, being put in the ribbon under the pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. It's printed on the back of the U.S. dollar bill. So it's moving on. At the end of World War II, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt came together at Yalta in an effort to end all war. And it was during these meetings that the concept of the global government structure called the United Nations was formulated. One key American man was responsible for the formation of the United Nations. His name was Alger Hiss. And I was telling Doug Norvell before I walked in here, I never get tired of talking about the origin of the United Nations and who wrote the charter for that. Because you go to the United Nations today and take a tour, they don't mention anything about Alger Hiss. They don't want you knowing about Alger Hiss and what the United Nations was designed to be from its inception. So you say, who was Alger Hiss? Well, Alger Hiss organized the American delegation, and he served as the acting Secretary General at the first UN meeting. Now, you go to the UN today, and they got pictures of all the UN Secretary Generals, but no picture of Alger Hiss. Well, I'll tell you about it here in a minute. I don't want to ruin it. So Hiss also served on the steering and executive committees and was charged with the responsibility of actually writing the UN Charter. Now, after playing such a dominant role in developing the Charter in 1945 and in the founding conference, 3 years after that, he was convicted in the United States courts of lying to cover his activities as a communist spy. So, yeah, he was a convicted communist spy, the guy who wrote the United Nations Charter, the one they adhere to today. According to WorldNet Daily, it all began unraveling in 1948 when Alger Hiss was accused of being a Soviet spy. Because the statute of limitations on espionage had run out, he was convicted only of perjury. But decades later, after the Hiss trial had been long forgotten, by most archival evidence, it surfaced confirming the accusations. Alger Hiss, who was a public servant with access to classified documents, had indeed passed crucial information to the Soviets for more than a decade. This guy wrote the charter for the United Nations, the current charter. Now, previous to this, Alger Hiss he'd accompanied Franklin D. Roosevelt to the Yalta Conference, where the carving up of Europe by the United States and Russia took place after World War II. And at this time, Roosevelt was very sick. He was a dying man. And consequently, Alger Hiss carried the bulk of the negotiations for America. So remember, he was a convicted communist spy. So what Russia did not win on the battlefield, they won at the peace table because their own agent, Alger Hiss, was assisting Roosevelt with the negotiations. So this explains why Russia received so many concessions at the end of World War II. You wonder why Russia got so much of Eastern Europe? Now you know. They had Alger Hiss on their side of the table, who was a spy for them. So Hiss designed the United Nations to be a global union of socialist republics. You were never taught that in high school. Irvin Baxter has told me back then, when he was in high school, early 60s, that the last chapter of his history book said that the United Nations is the great last humanitarian hope for the world. So he was taught that it was a very good thing. They were never taught that it was designed to be a socialistic one world governing body. And so the emblem of the Soviet Union was a globe and two sheaves of wheat around it with a hammer and sickle imposed in the middle. Well, the emblem of the United Nations is also a globe with two olive branches around it. So when the insignia of the United Nations was designed, obviously they left the hammer and sickle out because it would have been too obvious of what really was going on. And so it's very important that we understand from the get-go that the Alger Hiss signed the wrote the charter for the United Nations, and guess what? Not one word of that has ever changed. The current United Nations charter, you can go on the internet and read it. The current charter that is adhered to by the United Nations was written by a convicted communist spy who designed it to be a socialistic, communistic, one world governing body. And the Bible prophesies that just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, that there will be a world government established in the earth, and that the Antichrist will eventually usurp authority over that entity and govern the earth for a 42-month period just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. We're watching the establishment of this entity as we speak. Now, in the second half of the program, I'll get a lot more detailed into the world government.
If ever people need to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for End Time Magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will really impact your life. End Time has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that End Time Magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-END-TIME and get your subscription today.
Turn your scriptures from black and white into color. Experience the footsteps of Jesus. Understand Bible prophecy that is coming to pass right now. Join Irvin and Judy Baxter and the End Time team this spring 2018 for a life-changing trip to Israel and Jordan. Mark your calendar for April 26th through May 11th for this amazing journey. Call 1-800-END-TIME, that's 1-800-363-8463 and press 2, or go to endtime.com/Israel-tour to receive your information today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archives button.
So you can see now why we were not taught this in high school or in college. There's no mention of Alger Hiss in our history books or in our college curricula. Because the fact is, Hiss designed the structure of the United Nations to ultimately become a socialistic world governing body. Now, Alger Hiss went to prison, but the United Nations continued to be a structure for the one world government system. And to this day, like I said, not one word of the original United Nations Charter has changed. It is today and will always be a socialistic world governing institution. And the establishment here in the United States has been behind that to the nth degree. David Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family donated the property that the United Nations is built on the East River in New York, right in downtown Manhattan. The Rockefeller family donated the property to them. So our establishment here in the United States is behind, they're all for a world governing body. That's why you wonder why they dislike, that's a nice word, dislike Donald Trump so much, is because he's been against it. And so you can kind of understand what's going on in the news as a result of this. Now, some do deny that this is true, stating that there's no such thing as a legitimate world governing order. They claim that the United Nations, along with many of the like-minded institutions, the IMF, the International Criminal Court, the World Bank, that they're simply working towards global governance. Well, here's a question for you. What's the difference between global governance and global government? The answer is there's no difference. World government, global governance, it's all the same thing. And so there absolutely is a world government established across the globe today. So one aspect of that, and one of the things, the agendas they're really pushing, is sustainable development. Whenever you hear the term sustainable development in the news, and believe me, I mean, Pope Francis, everybody's pushing sustainable development. These people that believe in a world government. But all sustainable development is really just a catchphrase. And it's used by activists and government agencies involved in the implementation of the United Nations Agenda 2030, which, according to their own website, says that we are determined to take the bold and transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path. Now get this, as we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind, and this 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets, which they have announced, they demonstrate the scale and ambition of this new universal agenda. So it's a global agenda, remember, to transform the world into this global governing body. That's what the Sustainable Development Goals are all about. So the ultimate goal of Agenda 2030 is the control by the United Nations and a future one world government of all human settlements, really to determine where you can live, what land should be used for, consumption and production of every person on earth. They want to control every aspect of your life and my life. That's the goal. And the Bible says in the end time that the majority of people on earth will follow after this. So let me spend a little time just on the Sustainable Development Goals, just to make sure you get it, because President Obama, the President of the United States, our previous president, signed us on to these to yield up sovereignty and to let the United Nations govern a lot of our country. So the Sustainable Development Goals, they were unanimously adopted by 193 member states of the United Nations, including the United States, back on September 25th of 2015. And the goals make up the international communities, the world governments, really a 15-year socialistic blueprint, or to be implemented by 2030. It's a socialistic blueprint of global governance for every person on the earth. And they named it, here's what they named it. I mean, they're not even trying to hide it, really. Transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So the goal is a universal policy, and it's an agenda designed to convert the nations of the world into a global community governed by the United Nations. That's the goal. And think about it. We had a president of the United States that signed us up and said, yes, we will adhere to that. So the agenda is comprised of 17 main goals, accompanied with 169 targets under those goals, and it's designed to manage the planet. You say, man, you're getting way out there now. I'm going to prove it to you here in just a second. So you say, well, why do you say socialistic? Well, I say socialistic because the plan includes the number one plank of socialism, and that is the principle of wealth redistribution. And it states that the reduction of inequality will only be possible if wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. So in the plan, they're calling for wealth redistribution. So it's one of the major planks in a socialistic platform. It's a socialistic one world governing body, the United Nations, just like Alger has created it to be. And I refer to it as global governance of every aspect of every person on the earth, since the plan actually states that we are committing to making fundamental changes in the way our societies produce and consume goods and services. So they want to control the way you and I produce and consume things for our families, our businesses, our communities. Here in Dallas, Texas, I mean, it comes right down to home at this point. Now, governments, international organizations, the business sector, other non-state actors and individuals, they have to contribute by changing unsustainable consumption and production patterns. This is what they want to happen. And this is all very, very real. So the propaganda, which it really is all propaganda, it's all about control. But they need a way to sell it to everybody and get everybody to buy in. But it's really propaganda. The propaganda is that humans are using the earth's resources at such a rate that nothing's going to be left for future generations. And therefore, the United Nations or the world government has to establish a master plan to govern the earth's citizens. In other words, we don't know how to take care of ourselves. We don't know how to govern ourselves. So these global elite have to have a master plan to govern us lowly citizens, all 7 billion plus of us. So, number one, it must, in true socialistic form, redistribute the wealth of the world. This is their plan. Redistribute the wealth of the world so that everyone is considered equal. You understand, under Karl Marx' Communistic Manifesto, one of the biggest problems was the haves and the have-nots. Well, they say, hey, under this socialistic platform, we need to take from them that have, because the main problem in society, or one of the main ones, is these people have and they rule them that have not, and so we're going to take from them, give to these guys, in other words, basically steal from them, give to them that have not. We're going to equal the playing field and everybody's going to be happy, and we will rule them. It's not how it works. Socialism, communism has never been successful in any society ever, and it never will be. Number two, they want to control the production and consumption of every person on the earth. Number three, they strive to achieve universal health care, i.e., Obama signed us on to this. Did he push health care? Absolutely, Obamacare. It's a mess. But this is one of the things they were saying. We got to have universal health care for everyone. And they want to control the climate. Think about that. Control the climate. That's not even possible. God controls the climate. There's no way we can control the climate. God controls the climate. They want to manage our cities, our infrastructure. I'm talking about, I live in a place called Wiley, Texas, and they want, I'm not talking about just big cities like Dallas, New York, Chicago, Houston. No. If your town has 300 people in it, they want to control that. Every aspect of every person, every aspect of your life, every person. They want to govern the oceans, and they want to govern land usage along with all the ecosystems. And people have started to feel that here in the United States. Hey, no, you can't put a pond there. You can only put a pond on your property here. Well, who says so? Well, these are the regulations. Who made the regulations? Who are you to tell me what I can do with my land that have been handed down from my great-grandpa, my grandpa, to me? I mean, who's to tell me that? And these are the Sustainable Development Goals. That's what this is all about. And this, folks, is world government. Remember, the Bible prophesies a world government just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is the ongoing fulfillment of that. The problem is the administration of the plan. What's the old saying? You can't measure what you can't manage what you can't measure. Well, consider the size of this effort. I think there's just over 7 billion people on the earth today. So target 8 of the goal, 8 of goal number 3 is to achieve universal health care. How do you roll out a system and monitor it effectively and make sure it's monitored? Well, how could you measure something like that? Well, the Directions magazine reports that ESRI, the ESRI technology, very, very important. ESRI technology will help power the United Nations new global data hub. Now, I'm going to leave it right here because I'm coming up to a break, and I want to make sure you get this. Very, very important, because they've actually, as of early part of December, they've partnered with somebody who's going to help them. It's one of the global leaders in this area, help them to be able to share information, to create an enormous global data hub to where they'll be able to measure and monitor how all these nations are carrying out their edicts. I'm talking about carbon tax, everything, the wealth redistribution, the equality, the climate change. They're going to have all this in a huge data hub and track everything. And so what you say, well, what's this all about? It's world government. It's the world government prophesied in the end time to be here just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. You say, well, world government, that don't sound too bad. The Antichrist is eventually going to usurp authority over this and rule with an iron fist. The world government is something you absolutely do not want to be a part of, and it's prophesied in your Bible.
The nation of Israel, God's chosen place from the beginning of time. It's no coincidence that strife, conflict, and rumors of war follow it every day. We believe America's destiny is to aid the nation of Israel and Jewish people around the world. This is something we're passionate about. End Time Ministries is partnering with the Jewish Agency for Israel and outreach to assist Jews to find their way home. Your gift will greatly impact America's God-given destiny to join with the Jews so they also can have full understanding of Bible prophecy and what is just ahead. Become a partner today. If you are unable to donate financially, please continue to pray for America's direction on helping Israel and its calling to assist God's chosen nation. The Bible predicts there is another Jewish Holocaust just ahead. Persecution against the Jews will take place. Help today by donating any amount to save the Jews by calling 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com right now.
So I had a lady contact us here, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks ago or so. She sent me some information on a company called ESRI. And she said, I wanted you guys to be aware of a United Nations contract with a company to develop global mapping data. And she said it'll eventually be able to locate individuals anywhere on the planet. She said they say it is to support the Sustainable Development Goals. It's going to be able to locate someone in a building on what floor they're on what part of the floor. I haven't got to that yet as far as my research. And she said that her husband is working in the 911 industry, and has been done so for over 20 years. And he is the one who learned of the UN's contract, and that it's clearly understood the implications immediately, because I guess these guys had been following us and learning about world government and things like that. And so I went and did research on ESRI just to make sure I could validate what she said. Not that I didn't believe her, but I just wanted to do some research before I brought it to you guys on the radio. And it's what she said is actually very, very true. And I want to make sure I get you. It says, so this is from Directions Magazine, and it reports that the ESRI technology will help power the United Nations new global data hub. So on December 11th, now we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals here. How do you track them? Because it's the United Nations leading effort to govern the world. But how do you measure all that? You can't manage what you can't measure. Well, on December 11th, ESRI, who is the global leader in spatial analytics, announced that ESRI and the United Nations Statistics Division, they're working with a number of member states to utilize a data hub, a global data hub that will allow countries to measure, monitor, and report on the Sustainable Development Goals in a geographic context. Okay, so we're talking about global government here, folks. You can't manage what you can't measure. They're wanting to manage the globe. But they can't do that if they can't make sure that these goals are being implemented. So now they've joined up with ESRI and said, now we've got a management tool, a monitoring tool, a measuring tool that we can say, oh, now, India, you guys aren't doing your part. Let's shore it up. Because remember, it's the Transforming Our World Agenda 2030. They're hoping to have all these goals implemented by the year 2030. And so they're pushing with all their worth right now. And so that's why they've just teamed up with ESRI in early December. And the new hub is called the Federated System for the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's based on ESRI's ArcGIS platform, and is going to use the location intelligence to make it easier for countries to collect, analyze, and share the data required to monitor progress towards the SDGs. Now imagine you're a country out here and you are obeisance, many countries are, to the United Nations. They look to them for answers, guidance, leadership, and the United Nations says, hey, you're going to be part of this ESRI system, Global Data Hub, and we're going to monitor you. The Bible says most nations on earth will follow after this entity. So they're going to be able to monitor, manage these individuals using this data hub. And this just happened in early December. And so the SDGs, like I said, they're a set of global goals that include such objectives as poverty eradication, access to safe water, clean oceans, eliminating hunger, gender equality, again, climate action, come on, peace and justice, education, and other important areas on the UN agenda. And that's what it is. It's an agenda. They're trying to control the world. It's global governance at its best. And this federated system explores new pathways for facilitating data flows and action through the data hubs. And it then supports and informs data-driven decision-making by making the data open, usable, interoperable, and visual. It's shared. And everybody the governing system sits back and says, okay, Uruguay, okay, South America, whoever, Rio de Janeiro, you need to shore up on your carbon taxes, and you need to shore up on this and keep the oceans cleaner. There's going to be monitoring of all this. I mean, this is huge. And they state that the federated system for the SDGs leverages enabling technologies and capabilities to strengthen the ability of the national and global statistical systems to manage and share data and good practices for the SDGs. Now that comes from Greg Scott, who's the interregional advisor for the UNSD, the Global Geospatial Information Management. So this stuff is very, very, very real, folks. And he said this has already been provided the opportunity for national statistical offices to condition and structure data so that it can be portrayed in a geographical context and provide more insights and enable us to look at dependencies and interdependencies across SDG indicators. They've actually tried this out in many countries already before they let it out to the news that they're going to do it. They went ahead and implemented it in many countries. The news about ESRI came out in early December. Now, more importantly, the federated system allows collaboration across countries and makes it possible to measure the success, this is the goal, of the Global Sustainable Development Goals, the initiatives, for the first time. This was signed onto in September 25, 2015. And they've had people try to implement it in different things, but as of right now, for the first time, they'll be able to measure what's going on once this is implemented globally, and then they can begin to manage and say, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Let's shore up on your, let's say, a carbon tax. You're putting off, your country's putting off too much carbon emissions. You need to buy from another country that is not putting off as many, even though that's not going to solve any problems. But it's wealth redistribution. You understand what's going on here? And so that's what they're wanting to do. Remember the socialistic plan that's going on. They want to redistribute the wealth of the world under this socialistic one world governing entity. Well, a carbon tax is a good way to do that. That's one of the things that this data hub will be tracking. And the use of this federated system is to monitor the progress of the United Nations. Now, this is in the article. I'm not making this up. It's to monitor the progress of the United Nations 2030 agenda. And it's the ongoing fulfillment, we know, of the establishment of an end-time world government. It's prophesied in Revelation chapter 13. And so it's very important that you understand what's going on, that this stuff is not just conspiracy theory and, oh, you guys, this is just sensationalism. No, this stuff's really happening. And I thank the lady, I'm trying to think of her name, that gave me that. Well, she may not want me to give her name, but I do thank you for the information on this. We got it back on the 12th of December, the day it happened. She sent me an email that day, so thank you for that information. And, of course, I've got to verify anything before I put it in our magazine or come on the air with it. So, but yes, I did validate it, and it's very, very true. So I do thank you again for that information. Now, I had something else I was going to go through. I don't have time to go through the whole thing. It was, I had an article or a speech that I was going to go through from the United Nations Development Programs report. And it was Helen Clark. She gave a keynote speech on the improved global governance to meet our shared challenges. She was speaking at the World Government Summit last February. I was going to go through the speech because she talks about sustainable development, everything we've been talking about, and that how we're headed straight down the road. We're not getting on the road to global governance. She was talking about how far we are along the road in global governance. And so I was going to go through a lot of that with you. I'm not going to have time. If you want to read the parts of the speech that I pulled, or you can go read it yourself. She was the keynote speaker at the World Government Summit. And think about it. They're not even really trying to hide this anymore. I mean, it's called the World Government Summit for a reason. That it's a world government. They're trying to govern the world. And this lady preaches about the Sustainable Development Goals because these people realize, they're globalists, they realize that the Sustainable Development Goals, our agenda by 2030, is to govern every single individual on the planet. So with the time I have left, let me kind of bring this home right down into our living room, because it's very, very important to you and I. You say, well, you guys teach we're not going to be part of the world governing body. We do teach that. And every one of you, if you live here in the United States, should be very, very, very thankful for that. Believe me, because it's going to get rough before it gets better when the Lord comes back. And so we may be saved from some of that here in the United States. But around most of the world, this is coming to pass. But also, all of the prophecies are converging. My main goal is to get you to believe that we're in the end time. We get this question all the time. Oh, you guys are calling yourselves end time ministries. You say we're in the end time. Prove it. Well, my first response is, which prophecy, which end time prophecy do you want me to discuss? I can talk to you about the mark of the beast. There are two major efforts in the world to number every human being. The World Bank has an effort, ID4D, to number every human being on the planet. And also the United Nations has an effort to number every human being on the planet, and it's called ID 2020. You can go look up both of them. And there are two major efforts by world governing bodies to number every human being on the planet. Revelation 13, 16 through 18, discusses the mark of the beast and says everyone's going to be given a number without which they won't be able to buy or sell. You're going to be given a mark without which you're not going to be able to buy or sell. So everybody's going to be given their own unique identification number. There are two major efforts to do that in the earth as we speak. It was never possible in the history of man until the invention of the computer and the internet. And so that's just one, the world government mark of the beast. You can talk about the world religious system that's being formed right now with the call by all these huge interfaith movements and the ecumenical movement calling all of the Protestant daughters home to the Catholic Church, and all these interfaith movements saying, you know, the Parliament of World Religions, anybody can be saved. It doesn't matter what you believe. Let's just all love each other and get along. That's the message. And so consequently, we're seeing a world religious system. The efforts to precursors to building the third temple, everything's prepared for that. All the blueprints, all of the implements are ready. The sixth trumpet war, look at what's going on in the Middle East. It's easily proven that we're in the end time. And this world government that I've been talking about today, it's one of the most recognizable prophecies, letting us know beyond a shadow of all doubt that we're not looking for the end time to begin, we're in the end time.
End of the Age is a production of End Time Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. End Time Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.